Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us again in our continuing series on political division and national divorce in America, where we talk to professors, thinkers, scholars, writers, anybody with an intelligent opinion, so we can have an in-depth discussion about the potential future of America. With us today is Scott S. Powell, author of Rediscovering America. Scott Powell is a guest contributor at the Hoover Institute at Stanford. He's a senior fellow on the Center of Wealth, Poverty, and Morality at the Discovery Institute. Scott Powell's been an entrepreneur for 30 years, founding two companies. He's a fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution and is currently a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute. Having been a frequent guest on national radio and TV, he has also published 250 articles in such publications as the Wall Street Journal, Barron's Financial, New York Post, and USA Today. He has been called on twice to provide expert witness testimony for the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. Additionally and foundationally, his background has been shaped by the School of Hard Knocks. After working in saving, Scott took leave of absence from undergraduate studies, sailing some 5,000 miles on a catboat and then backpacking over Europe and Middle East. He's traveled all over the world, and he received his Ph.D. from Boston University. Professor, did I get anything wrong so far with your background and your introduction?
No, you're very generous. That's basically a synopsis of my life. I've gone from sort of a worldwide traveler to a more sedate academic teacher and writer.
Sedate, nice word choice. Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Today we want to talk to Scott Powell about forgive me for a second. There we go. This book, Rediscovering America with Scott S. Powell, how the national holidays tell an amazing story of who we are. Rediscovering America, how the national holidays tell an amazing story about who we are. Have you ever wondered why everyone wants to immigrate to America? Rediscovering America answers that question, and it's like no other history you have ever read. More than an account of people, dates, and events, this story is about the hidden hand of purposeful historical development where the main actors are colorful characters participating in an American drama of little known but remarkable events where overcoming incredible odds of failure is more unbelievable and engaging than fiction. What is this book roughly about, Professor, Rediscovering America? What stories do national holidays tell about real America and who we are?
Well, the holidays, the backstories of the holidays, the reason for the holidays coming about was because they commemorated certain remarkable things that are part of our country's founding, if you will. We were, and not just our founding, but our founding and evolution, I should say, because we had a remarkable founding, but then we went through, many struggles. From the very beginning, the beginning of the country was, of course, punctuated by a war for independence from Great Britain, and we then went through a rough period of near collapse under the Articles of Confederation, which was sort of the first governing documents before a constitution was drafted. But even when that constitution was drafted, we had slavery existing in 7 or 8 of the southern states, and that of course is a great blemish on our history, but most people don't understand how that was addressed at that time. Slavery existed everywhere in the world. America was no exception. What was exceptional about America was that we were the first country to end slave trade. And that was done at the Constitutional Convention in Article 1, Section 9. There is a commitment that slave trade would end at the by 1808. In other words, 1807 would be the last year of slave trades, and that's 1787 was the year of the Constitution. 20 years later is 1807. So there'd be no more slave trade after that time, and all signatories agreed to that. And at the same time, as the Constitution was being drafted, even before the Constitution was signed and fully formed, the Continental Convention was taking place simultaneous to the Constitutional Convention, and the Continental Convention was the convening of the delegates from the 13 states at that time. They met in Philadelphia, and they were talking about, in the summer of 1787, they were talking about how the Northwest Territories would be governed. That those territories then were in the possession, part of America, and there was a decision, and it was codified and memorialized in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 that slavery would be outlawed in all of the Northwest Territories. So for these critics of America who claim that we were, that we had systemic slavery, in sort of the founding and DNA of the country, it's absolutely irresponsible and inconsistent with the historical record. America from its earliest days put in place things that would eliminate slavery, restrict it, and remember that the colonies who formed, who got together drafting the Constitution, which created a new government, a federal government, were very leery of giving that federal government too much power. And there was a perspective that it was really the states' responsibility to manage the affairs within their states, including how the economy was managed. Slavery would fall into that category, and that there was great hope that the states would solve that problem. Unfortunately, they didn't, and we ended up having 7 states secede after the election of Abraham Lincoln, and then a war ensued, and ultimately that war wasn't just over secession; it was over the issue of slavery. And when the Union won the war officially, then of course we know that slavery ended for America. Voting rights were given to blacks, and we still had a ways to go because of what cropped up in the South was the Reconstruction period did not go well, and we sort of ended up with a segregated, a discriminatory and segregated South, and ultimately, and that was even codified in Plessy versus Ferguson, a Supreme Court decision of 1893, and so it really took the civil rights movement, which began in the middle of the 20th century, to really fulfill the vision of Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, wherein he said that it was that America was based on equality, and so the course of every nation doesn't go just straight, and it can take time to really realize the ideals that the founders of the country would have. And of course, our country is so unique because we were the first country founded on ideas,
right?
Rather than the spoils of war and blood lineage and so forth.
Right.
So,
I think it's a uniquely American situation that we have this debate of, are we living up to our founding and what it was like? Because most countries were founded just to protect their ethnic group, and it's like, how well is can we provide better for our people? Great, then we're doing good. And in America, we had these concepts of our, is not just a more perfect union, not just the pursuit of happiness, but a series of rights and guarantees. And are we making sure to live up to this? I'm not sure other countries have those debates like you're saying. Is there other? So obviously you're talking about the history of America, and there's a current narrative that it's always been born in slavery. And you were pointing out that there was a pushback against slavery going back to the inception, the fetal stage of the country.
that's right.
And its
That's
inception.
very true.
What other things can you tell us about who we are as Americans, other than the slavery story, from our national holidays?
Well, I think that there are two things that really that distinguish America, and we've talked about one of them. But after the Constitution was ratified in 1788, it really represented the first governing document in history that established the primary role of government was to uphold and protect citizens' unalienable rights, as spelled out in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. And second, the Constitution established for the first time in human history that government solely derives its legitimacy and power from the consent of the governed. I mean, those are two very incredible things about America. No other country achieved those things as America did.
Right.
And so, with the legitimacy of government being singularly established by the consent of the governed, it follows that elections are both critical and sacrosanct. And what has set America apart from so many other countries in the world up until recently has been the honesty and integrity of our electoral system. And I suppose it's because of the normalcy bias that has been long established in the hearts and minds of so many Americans. It's been difficult for them to fathom that the 2020 election and the 2022 elections were compromised and fraudulent due to a myriad of corrupt operations. And let's hope that Carrie Lake finally gets her case adjudicated, because there's been an enormous reluctance to really look at the full scope of vote fraud. There's a massive amount of evidence, and it's kind of a commentary. The fact that we've not been able to face this and deal with it is really a reflection on the breadth and the scope of corruption that now exists in our country and in the judiciary in various states. It's a very sad. We're at a very sad place in our history that we can't, face up to mistakes and commit ourselves to finding out what really happened. And if there was vote fraud and it was a fraudulent election, then we can have, we can bring about an adjudication that would fix that. Maybe it would be having another election in between the normal cycle. Maybe it would be, in the case of the presidential election, it would be the removal of the sitting installed president and the reinstatement of the president who actually won the election. That was Donald Trump.
I'd like to read a quote to you, if I may, and I'd like to get your opinion from that. This is a upcoming interview we have scheduled with former diplomat Stephen Halpern. And this was what he said when we asked him the question that I'm going to ask you about political division in America and how bad it is, because I think you just alluded to it. We can't even agree on who won an election. Not a good sign. Not a good sign.
Well, we cannot agree on thoroughly investigating it.
Right. Can't even agree on having an investigation.
The sad thing is we can't get to the bottom of a problem.
We can't. Right. We can't.
So this lingers over our country, and we've been through a second election cycle where in Arizona it's very clear. There's overwhelming evidence there, and let's hope that it gets properly adjudicated.
And that's just it. You're talking about how we can't even agree on elections, and we can't even agree to investigate an elections. That's right. That was. I mean, that's significant. I remember hearing, when Donald Trump was president, that let's investigate everything he did, right? If he did nothing wrong, he has nothing to worry about. I heard that from liberals up and down, all over the place. Now Joe Biden's president. Let's investigate this. Nah, we don't need to do that. Why don't we investigate this? Nah, he's not as bad as Trump. We can just assume it's not as bad. I'm like, wow. We used to do investigations, and we used to trust the conclusions of those investigations. And if they said there was no boogeyman, we put it to bed and moved on. And if they said there was something, we looked into it as a country. Let me read a quote to you from former diplomat Stephen Halpern. He's been a diplomat working in 20 different countries. And this is what he said. We are already in the midst of cultural civil war. No one wants a second civil war in the U.S. that would involve bloodshed. Having said that, when we lose faith in our institutions and or our institutions do not respect us or follow the law, that breakdown in trust can lead to a national divorce. And as you know, some divorces get acrimonious. Thoughts, feelings, Professor?
Well, I think it's an accurate statement of where we are. I think it's equally important. I mean, just that's reality. That is the status quo. But it's important for people to understand how we got here. How did this happen in this great country that provides, more freedom, more guarantees, more opportunity than any other country in the world. Americans have an incredible system. They're truly blessed people in being free to pursue their dreams, and to have a sphere of privacy that can't be invaded by government. This is really unique to the American system. So what has happened that has caused us to lose this? I think first and foremost, we have to recognize that the natural state is a Hobbesian state where life is nasty, brutish, and short. That without a civil society, without institutions of government and stability, it's a brutal world, and that was the norm up until civilization really evolved, and that was in Europe. But there was no democracy in Asia ever until after World War II. I mean, democracy did not exist there. It came in the West, and it came really out of the Judeo-Christian influence. And the whole idea of a rule of law, you consider the basic laws of the common law in Britain, which was largely brought to America, it is based on the Old Testament. It is based on spiritual laws. And the founding of America was, the people who came here before we were even at a constitutional convention, these were primarily Christian people of different denominations, and they settled in 13 different colonies. Some were more restrictive, like the Puritans that settled in the Boston area, whereas the Quakers, the William Penn's colony in Pennsylvania was extraordinarily tolerant. We have a great diversity.
Right.
But what really enabled America to be born constitutionally was the Judeo-Christian principles that provide this vision for a free society where people are free, and yet they are, there are boundaries within freedom, rule of law, and so forth. So that's how America was born, not as a Christian nation per se, because really the founders did not want to establish a Christian theocratic system. They knew that would lead to all kinds of problems, as it did in some of the experimental colonies, notably the Boston colony, the Puritans. They had a bit of a theocratic government there, and it created all kinds of problems, not the least of which is the Salem witch trial that never should have really happened. But in any case, this founding of America by Christian people, Christian men, 95% of whom were Christian, structuring this amazing system of checks and balances, a recognition that there is a dark side in human nature, that power tends to corrupt people, and so they created a system to mitigate and divide the power to really restrain corruption. And they attached to the Constitution a Bill of Rights, which gave people and the states, it prescribed that they had freedoms that couldn't be, could not be infringed on by the federal government.
Right.
So it was really a remarkable system, and there was also a recognition that the states, the federal system, which put a lot of power in the states and gave the states freedom to structure their governments in their own way, that would be a petri dish, if you will. Different states would have different solutions, and that the states that were successful would be models for other states to emulate. So it was a self-correcting system, if you will, based on competition, based on merit.
Right. Well, let me.
Really quite remarkable.
Let me ask, if I may. Let me ask you though to get back to the central question here. Is I think what you're saying is that there's a lack of faith in institutions. We were looking at elections. We were looking at the ability to have Congress do proper investigations. And then I'm talking to somebody else who you haven't spoken with, and he's also saying there's a lack of faith in institutions. Would you say that Americans overall today, at least compared to 20, 30 years ago, have a dramatic lack of faith in all institutions? I think except for the military. The military is the only thing that Americans seem to have faith anymore. We've lost almost all faith in the Supreme Court, Congress, the presidency, and regulatory bodies. Does the system work anymore? Has it not? And is a lack of faith in these institutions, does that lead to us breaking up because we no longer have central institutions holding us together?
Well, it can lead to breaking up, but I think it's important for people to recognize that the institutions of our government were very sound, and the corruption has arisen because the people that have gone into government and populated the regulatory agencies and so forth have been, have come under influence, and corrupting forces have been at work to basically subvert the proper functioning of our governmental institutions, and particularly our courts and our regulatory bodies. That politics has entered into them so much so that they no longer are functioning with such a thing as equal justice under the law, which, by the way, is inscribed in stone of the Supreme Court. Does anyone in America think that there's equal justice under the law anymore in America, the way it's functioning? No. We have a two-tier justice system, and it's a political system. So if you're a Democrat, a prominent Democrat, you're going to get protection. You can violate the law and not necessarily be arraigned and arrested. And you think of Donald Trump recently. Right. He's the first ex-president of the United States to be arraigned over what?
Right.
Over things that happened a long time. It may or may not have happened a long time ago, mm-hmm. that were dismissed by other courts and other judges and other lawyers who looked at the case. And there's no case here.
Right.
And
well,
we don't.
No, I don't know.
It's full scale war. Political war is almost unrestrained warfare now against particularly Donald Trump, but really the American people who are rejecting the liberal, progressive, secular state, and there's a culture war going on, and it's rooted in the loss of a consensus of values that were actually, we could almost call them American values, the essential values that were sort of everyone generally agreed upon them, Democrats and Republicans, up until up until I can't say exactly when, but certainly by the 1990s we saw beginnings of breakdown in America, and it's just gotten worse and worse, and it was highly accelerated in the Obama years, and now it's just on steroids in the Biden administration.
So it sounds like you're saying we used to have a common culture, common belief system. We've sort of started,
and therefore you could have compromise, and you could have debate. You could talk to each other.
Right.
You could work through things.
Right.
And this was part of this was America. You know, it was a country of diversity where people had tolerance and respect for people of different beliefs. That is gone now.
Okay. And because we've lost this common respect of values, we seem to have lost a common faith in institutions. And you were talking about the leadership is corrupt, and that's why that's happening. But I think you're also saying, you know, the reason we're allowed to have corrupt leaders is that we as a people, at least half of us, have lost a shared vision of common values. Is that fair?
It is fair. It is fair. And I think, I mean, but the causes of our political electoral corruption are when you have massive vote fraud, you've got a big problem, and you have a big problem that you can't own up to it and deal with it, and that you demonize people. In fact, the FBI has persecuted people that were investigating electoral irregularity and vote fraud. You know that. You're aware of that, right? That the FBI has harassed, has seized the phones and the computer systems of people who were doing nothing other than looking at that election fraud.
I wasn't.
That's what they were doing. They weren't violating any laws.
Mm-hmm.
They were following their conscience and their desire to see if they couldn't find get to the bottom of the evidence, the substantive evidence about vote fraud. But every one of them, all the major figures. I mean, we know Mike Lindell. We know the story of Mike Lindell because he's such a colorful guy, and his story. You know, he told his story many times about being, I think, at a Hardee's, I guess it was a burger place, when he was pinned in by three cars surrounded him. They were FBI, and they seized his cell phone, and I don't think they arrested him, but they wanted to get his cell phone. Now, why would they want his cell phone?
I don't know. I really don't want to go down that avenue because that starts to get into a whole other thing, and the algorithms will get tripped up. I need to keep it mostly on the rough topic. I did want to ask you about political division, and I was showing some polls that showed that since 1976, and this is in the Wall Street Journal in 2020, since 1976, both Republicans and Democrats have more concretized. So you used to have 45% of conservatives saying, I'm hardcore conservative. Now it's 76%. You used to have 28% of Democrats said, I'm hardcore liberal. Now it's 59%. Basically, the Democrats who have identified as hardcore liberal from moderate have increased by 100%, and the Republicans who have gone from moderate to hardcore red have increased by 100%, looking from 1974 to 2016, backing up some definitive shift in polarization. The question I want to ask for you is, just to be blunt, is America political division real? How bad is it? Marjorie Taylor Greene called for national divorce on President's Day. You had people in the media on both the left and the right said, and this was truly bizarre, there's no political division in America. Marjorie Taylor Greene's just making it up, just for herself. She's causing division. We have no problems. People basically all agree. Is that true or total garbage?
Who's making that? Do you remember who's making that argument?
So,
that's such a ridiculous argument.
Well, so Jack Probasek, who's on the far right, referenced a MSNBC article, which is the far left. So that was truly bizarre. And then you saw the Young Turks and Breaking Points News. Yeah, they're on the left. We're saying that. You also saw Stephen Colbert on national TV say it, and everybody laughed along with him. And then there were other conservatives who said it, like, oh, then there was the poll that came out. Republicans across the board reject what Marjorie Taylor Greene's saying. And I'm going, wow, look at all these viewpoints. All of the sudden she says this, saying there's no political division. Everybody must have forgotten all the national political stories coming out over the last 5 to 7 years, outright documenting political division. So I have to ask you and all these experts, is what we hear on TV from the talking heads right? There's no political division. Everything's fine. We basically all get together. Or is that a lie? And Marjorie Taylor Greene is telling the truth. We got problems, folks. Which one, in your opinion, Professor?
Well, I would say that probably Marjorie Taylor Greene's statement is more accurate than the others. My goodness, I mean, it's pretty apparent that we're a very divided nation, and we see it everywhere. We see it on college campuses. We see it in in the inability of the Democrats and the Republicans to compromise and work through things. Congress is more divided than it's ever been before. We see it in the culture. We see it everywhere. So for someone to deny that deny the division that's so self-evident, so apparent, it strikes me as being very disingenuous. I guess playing to some media, some media narrative that, and I think it would be more the Democrats that would do that to make an argument that we really, we're still inclusive. We're the big tent. we're not intolerant people. We are, when in fact, I mean, there's probably less tolerance now than there ever has been.
I mean,
as far as the Republican side, and I really take odds with this this polarity analysis, and I'll tell you why. The people on the right believe in plurality. They believe in the rule of law. They believe in a republic form of government for the most part. They believe that history is worth defending. It's worth learning from history. There's a consensus of values on the right now that are no different than they were back in the 1960s and the 1950s. The only difference is perhaps that the conservatives today articulate them more strongly because they feel they must, because there are people at war with them, and so they want to stand up for the values that they believe in. But these are values that are consistent with most of America for the first 185 years of our history, whereas the left, the old Democrats of John F. Kennedy and Harry Truman and so forth, that basically shared these values, those people are gone. So the Democrat Party has really been taken over by radical views that are intolerant, that have really no use for the Constitution. I mean, it's very clear. Mainstream Democrats today want to change the Constitution. Basically want to take it down. And so these two sides don't balance each other out. There's one side that's the wrecking crew. The left the Democrat Party is a wrecking crew wanting to dismantle the country. The right wants to keep the country, wants to keep its institutions.
I would like to point out a few things. So Jack Probasek is a alt-right guy. He said, we don't need national divorce. MSNBC is doing great coverage of how stupid Marjorie Taylor Greene is. Laura Ingraham is on Fox News. She also said the same thing. And she said, why do we need a national divorce? Republicans, do you really want to get rid of California? It's the land of Reagan. They've been talking trash on California for the last 15 years. Within 24 hours of Marjorie Taylor Greene's national divorce, you have Laura Ingraham come on Fox News and say something totally anathema to what they've been saying every single day for years. Don't get rid of California. We're all in this together. And then you had Reason Magazine, a libertarian magazine, outright trash this idea when for the previous 3 years, Reason Magazine would routinely talk about how political division is reasonable. But the day after Marjorie Taylor Greene said her statement, they had a different tone of voice. Those are all not Democrats. Thoughts, feelings?
Yeah, I can't speak for other people. I know that, politics, people that, there's true politics of getting elected, and then there's the politics of wanting to appear, believable, likable, reasonable to various audiences.
Right.
And so when and I believe it's true for many people that are in the limelight, from Laura Ingraham to Jack Posobiec.
Yeah.
They will say slightly different things to different people because they want to project an image that I've got it together. Keep watching me, pay attention to me. I'm a peacemaker. I'm a guy you can trust. When in fact, I think the people that trust the most are the truth tellers, and the truth can be very hard sometimes. It really is. Truth is tough. And the more we're reluctant to face the truth and talk about things, the more we sort of prolong our day of reckoning as a nation. We are moving towards some kind of reckoning, and I don't know. I pray that it won't be a civil war. I pray that there be a spiritual, a spiritual renewal in our country, because I think that's the only hope for changing people's attitudes. It's not going to come by laws and politics, but rather the sort of transformation, that internal transformation that people can go through a spiritual revival, something like we saw up there at Asbury University and other places. It's encouraging that this is happening, because I think it is probably our best source of hope that people can be transformed so that they become, they transcend politics and they get back to being good people, committed to pursuing the truth and allowing, full competition of ideas. And I believe that we need merit to prevail everywhere everywhere. We need the best people running companies. We need the best people running our government.
That gets to the next question I wanted to ask you, but before you go on, I forgot to mention about 4 days ago, Jason Whitlock, who does a show on Red Blaze TV, was on Tucker Carlson talking about the need for political division, and they cut him in the middle of his speech and went to commercial on Tucker Carlson. I thought Tucker Carlson was the most I tell it how it is type guy. He literally bowed out. You can look up the video of Jason Whitlock talking about we need political divorce nationally. They cut him in the middle of the speech on Fox and went to commercial and then acted like they never did it again. That's not Democrats.
Yeah. Well, it's not necessarily Tucker that makes that call to cut that.
Fair.
I don't know.
But Tucker never criticized it. Tucker said nothing. Tucker didn't criticize it.
He's got to keep peace with his employer, Fox. I think Fox made the call that this is debate. This is not the place for this to get an airing. Now, maybe there will be an airing in some way in the future. Maybe it won't be on Fox. I mean, look, Fox is is not the network that it used to be. They
I've
have
heard
individuals
that.
on there like Tucker and like Mark Levin that really are, I think, really truth tellers. They really want to pursue the truth wherever it leads.
To a degree.
But the rest
Tucker
of Fox is there's certain things you can't talk about. You can't talk about vote fraud on Fox.
Well, how much trust can we have in people who are like, I tell it how it is, except when my boss tells me not to, in which case I demur.
I know. I'm with you, man. That's why.
But I'm a truth teller. I'm not scared. I'm like, except when the boss says it, and I'm like, like.
Because I value my independence and I value the ability to tell the truth. So I'm not a syndicated columnist. I have publications that will publish almost anything I write, because I'm a truth teller, and they can count on that. And some of it makes some people feel uncomfortable, I suppose. But my goodness, if we could, if you remember, the whole purpose of truth is to help us live, good lives, keep us out of trouble, and make progress. Truth comes about. No one has a monopoly on truth.
Fair.
It turns out the truth emerges. Truth about things going on in politics and culture and so forth. There is a body of truth. We could say the Bible is probably the best source of spiritual truth. I mean, it is the perennial bestseller. I happen to believe it just is the most remarkable source of truth that anyone could ever ask for. It covers every aspect of life. It is truly the user's manual to living a good life. But now, truth. But the Bible says nothing about science, or it doesn't tell us how to fix things. It doesn't tell us about how to farm.
Set up a working democracy.
Right.
Oversee elections.
How do we do those things well? Well, by pursuing what works. And that is the truth, right? The truth works. So we've got to have a competition of ideas continuously, and it's going to drive the best ideas to the forefront, hopefully, where they can be adopted by everyone. So the truth is really worth pursuing. And the only way we get to it in the world of ideas is by having tolerance and being willing to listen. To people who think differently than we do.
Well, hold on. Let me ask you about that, because that's the next question. So I apologize, but I wanted to get your opinion on this. This is the big question we ask a lot of people. So when Marjorie Taylor Greene said, hey, red and blue can't get along, we need a national divorce, there was a Utah governor who came out and said, silly Marjorie, we don't need a national divorce. We need marriage counseling. What does marriage...
I would agree on that. I think that sounds like a pretty good analogy, marriage counseling. But
what does that look like?
How do you pull that off?
Yeah. What exactly?
Right?
That's Professor. Exactly. How do we pull off marriage counseling for a population of 200 to 300 million people that are at each other's throats like we haven't seen since the Civil War? Who does that?
Right. Well,
how do we accomplish that?
I've described it, in our prior segments. It really is all about a spiritual revival. If people could humble themselves, remember, to approach God, Christianity is so simple. It's acknowledging that we're flawed people, that we're sinners, that we're not people. We have problems, that we've inherited original sin. We have family sin from our family lineage, and so forth and so on. But we approach God by acknowledging that and repenting for it, and then we invite God's Spirit to come into us and transform us. And but that's a tough thing for a lot of people to do. But I would say that would be the tried and true way of getting a national reconciliation would be starting out by saying, hey, I'm sorry, I screwed up, I've said some things I never should have said, I've sometimes been extreme, I've overreacted, sort of a political repentance,
Like a 12 steps program?
Right, a 12 steps program.
You find those you harmed, and you have to go back to, hey, I wronged you, and I'm sorry.
I mean, that might not be practical to do. It might be very hard to do, but attitudinally, if we could just acknowledge that, and that we need a higher truth to bring us back together. That's the important thing. That the healing that we get, how does our body heal when we're injured? How is it that it heals? It heals because the Creator designed us to be able to heal. It's amazing. So when we invite the Creator into our lives spiritually, in our attitude, in our thinking, and in our hearts, I would never discount the power of healing that could take place. But there's a lot of people that are just hostile to any such idea of giving credence to God. They're committed agnostic, atheists, whatever. They're at war with God. They of course they don't understand that God wants them to be happy and fulfilled, and therefore they should invite Him into their lives, because most of these people, I mean, wouldn't you agree that the vast majority of people on the left are apparently very unhappy people?
I have some statistics.
They have no sense of humor anymore.
Well, full disclosure, as I've told everybody, I am a liberal, but I have two eyeballs and they work, and I can see things that are wrong. Like the Sun News article being suppressed was a big change for me. I'm like, that's wrong. I may not like Trump, but you cannot suppress legitimate news reporting that would affect the election against Biden just because you don't like Trump. And you cannot have intelligence agencies slam it as Russian propaganda when there is literally no evidence for that. That is horrible. That is against democracy. And that is not what we should do. And I've gotten into a lot of flack with fellow liberals for saying that, because they're all about, as long as our team wins, who cares?
Right.
And I'm like, that's wrong. Do you understand that when you play the game I don't care if we burn down the soccer field and the stadium and deflate the ball and rip up the ground as long as I win. Fine, but you'll never be able to play soccer again. And they don't understand how the winner takes all, do whatever it takes to win, will create such an unstable environment that will lead to automatic collapse right after you get your pound of flesh. They just don't see it. And it scares me.
You do, and I commend you. And
it scares me.
I want to encourage you to keep going, because you get it. You really do. And
that's
you
why
can be far more effective. You can be far more effective than I can be, because I'm a traditional values, classical liberal guy, and people would put me in the conservative camp. I think I'm very open-minded, frankly, and I'm willing to admit I'm wrong and go a new direction. But most people would just categorize me as, I'm in the conservative camp, and therefore, they can't learn anything from me. But I think with you, with your credentials, wow, you are an important voice.
Okay, I'm humbled now. I need a second to take that in. Thank you.
No, it's true. I'm telling you.
Thank you.
Be all that you can be, because we need your voice, and it's you can be far more effective, I think, than you think you can be. So I'm just encouraging you to don't get discouraged.
No.
The enemy.
No.
Remember how the enemy works.
No.
The enemy works in a number of ways. One is the enemy works through fear. Creating great fear in society and manipulating people through fear. But the other main avenue of the enemy is to demoralize to demoralize us. Where we come into self-doubt because we're being attacked relentlessly and demoralized. I mean, I think that we all have to struggle to overcome that because everything seems to be kind of crumbling around us right now.
I found a poll when we were talking about marriage counseling, coming together, following perhaps some Christian values, turning the other cheek. And one thing I've always told people, because I went to all Christian schools from like kindergarten to 6th grade. You don't.
Where did you grow up, by the way? Can I ask?
Fresno, California.
Okay.
Born and raised in Fresno, California, middle of the Central Valley. Mom was a hardcore Mexican devout Catholic. Dad was a former military officer. Both of them taught me these weird values like don't lie no matter what.
Right.
Tell the truth even when it's hard.
Weird values.
Keep your word when it's difficult. Just, don't not come through on a promise because it's tough. Bizarre things that you almost never see these days. Just, strange values.
Strange.
Right? And they are now.
Those values were once celebrated, and they are still true values.
They told me respect other people's opinions, even if you don't agree with them.
Uh-huh.
They told me talk to other people. Just because you talk to someone who disagrees with you doesn't mean you have to agree with them. Just because you're having a conversation doesn't mean, oh, you changed my mind. Just find out what they have to say just to know it. Strange values. Weird. But to get back at what you're talking about, marriage counseling, perhaps revival of Christian values. There is a poll here I'm looking at from Politico. 81% of Democrats would be against saying Christian nationalism is constitutional. 57% of Republicans would be against saying in the Constitution that the U.S. is a Christian party. Overall, 70% of all respondents, Republican, Democrat, were against declaring the U.S. a Christian nation. We can also look at another poll. Should the federal government enforce separation of church and state? 64% of Democrats say yes. 44% of Republicans say yes. So Republicans seem to be a little bit 50-50 on this, but the Democrats, who are at least the same size of the Republican Party, if not larger, are 4/5 against this. How do we have marriage counseling with people who are so dedicated against anything approaching Christian values or saying that we have anything in similarity with Christian values? Sorry. I'm sorry.
Can you restate that or just summarize it? So try to answer it.
Yeah. Fair enough. We need to have marriage counseling. I was asking you, how do we get the country to pull back from political division? Utah governor had suggested marriage counseling, and you said, yeah, I could see that. And one thing we need to do is get back to common values, perhaps returning to, hey, I was wrong when I slammed you. I need to listen to you. I need to turn the other cheek. I need to be more open. And these traditional values, some of which come from the Bible and Jesus. And I was saying, it looks like the Democrats hate the Bible and hate Jesus, according to these polls. So how are we going to get the Democrats, who are half of the country, to back Christian values?
Well, I think it's one person at a time, and I think that's why your voice is so important. I really do believe that the most important motivating factors in individuals' lives are to find meaning and fulfillment and to find happiness. And they go hand in hand. If you're fulfilled, if you have meaning and fulfillment in your life, you're going to be, you're going to be in a zone that's probably closer to being happy than sad.
Mm-hmm.
Part of life, we go through difficulties and sorrow, but if people could realize that the happiness that they're looking for is not going to be found by changing institutions and not changing things outside themselves, but rather changing things internally in their own lives. And one can put it in Christian terms, but I think that just keeping it simple like that it's an internal thing, and that we all need to work on our lives internally, because that's where the problems lie. It's not the externals. We're not going to be happier people when we remake the world. In some ways, I think people are it's really incredible that more people don't recognize that there's not a pot of gold at the end of the revolutionary rainbow. There's horror.
You got me there.
But people that are caught up in all this, they just think that it's just, if we just do this one more thing, we get this push this next agenda, and there's no end to it. That somehow happiness is going to emerge. No, it's not going to emerge. It's going to get worse.
I agree with that. I agree. There seems to be a belief on the left with liberals, people I know. Hey, there's a problem. Oh, can I show that 1 million other people are suffering from it from my chat groups? Okay, well, then it's a national problem. The moment I say it's a national problem, federal government, get out here and fix it. And how come you're not fixing it? It immediately goes that way. I've seen the thought process. I'm suffering from an issue. I found others suffering from it. That means it's not something for me to fix. It's a national problem. And therefore, I must demand all politicians to, I don't know, run up another $100 billion to figure out how to solve this problem, because this is what it's all about. There's almost no discussion about what could I do as an individual, even if it's unfair, and even if the decks are stacked against me, and even if that shouldn't happen. What can I do to fix it on my own? I almost never see that on the left.
I know. Yeah, I agree. It's I would love to see a turning point here on some of this. I really would. And maybe we don't know what that, in terms of, we spoke about election integrity. The turning point might come. It didn't come with examining the 2020 election, even though there were multiple. There's stacks of affidavits. There's video capture. There's testimony from a truck driver who delivered 260 ballots from Long Island to Pennsylvania. A truck full of ballots.
I really can't get into it. I hear you. I would tell everybody, look at the book. The algorithms. The moment I start veering into another subject that they feel blah, 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 then I'm all about that. And I've tried to dedicate myself to being able to interview people like you about a common topic of national divorce. So I apologize, but
don't worry. Don't worry. I'm just simply saying that I forget what I was saying. I was saying that we had this massive election irregularity. It affected our country dramatically. Right. I mean, look at what we have as a result of Biden's administration. It's almost unbelievable. It's almost a government against the American people. I mean, we have an open southern border resulting in a record surge of illegal entries, including criminals, human, child, sex, and drug trafficking elements. I mean, hello. We didn't have that before. The cancellation of the pipeline projects and the mandated restrictions on oil and gas and exploration and extraction, and then a drawdown of our U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, some of which was sold to China of all parties.
I saw that.
Yeah, it ended America's energy independence. It weakened our national security. And it's been a chief driver of inflation. Those are just two things. And if we talk about foreign policy, we probably start with the pullout of Afghanistan, which not only cost American lives, but $880 billion of advanced military hardware was left behind.
For terrorists. Yeah. For terrorists.
Yes.
For terrorists. Let's be honest.
How did this happen?
You've made the most powerful terrorist state the world has ever seen. You have literally created Osama bin Laden's dream of a powerful, independent, terrorist-focused, well-armed nation that can take any of its competitors, or a base for stable terrorism plotting. That's literally what Osama wanted, and Biden gave it to him. I do want to ask you about a reckoning coming. You had said something, and my ears perked up. If we don't come together, if we don't find some commonality on values or dealing with the corruption, what did you mean by a reckoning coming? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I think you're getting at division could get worse. How much worse can it get?
Well, it can get a lot worse. A civil war could break out where, and a civil war would be horrendous for our nation. I mean, once you start wars, it's very hard to stop them until one side is defeated, right? I mean, that's what we're seeing in Ukraine. That's what we saw in the two world wars. Occasionally they can be, when they're both sort of beat to a pulp, they can agree to a ceasefire, and that's what happened in World War I. There was an armistice. An armistice was called, and that turned out to be lasting and led to a final, a peace negotiation and a treaty which ended World War I. But war is very hard to contain once it starts. So we should do everything possible, and this is why I'm so critical of this element of the Biden foreign policy is that they want war to continue. They want to take on Russia, and that's world war. And both sides are nuclear armed. I mean, we're closer to nuclear war, perhaps, than we were at the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Totally
we
agree.
Pull back from this.
Totally agree.
This is craziness that the Biden administration is pursuing. I mean, thank goodness they haven't gone whole hog in giving more armaments and aid, but they've given a lot, and a lot of people have died unnecessarily, I think, because there was no peacemaker. There was no initiative taken. And, when you're making peace with your opponent, you're going to have to agree to give up some things. So it may be that, that Russia is going to claim the Donbass area, that Russian-speaking people, apparently that they actually feel more comfortable, maybe under Russian jurisdiction. But then Russia's got to agree to respecting, the independence of Ukraine and the West and the United States and NATO. I mean, this whole thing never should have happened. When the Soviet Union came apart in 1991 and Ukraine became an independent country, that was very problematic. Do you know what? One reason it was so problematic? Ukraine had a raft of Soviet nuclear missiles stationed on its territory. So how could Ukraine become an independent country having these nuclear missiles? They had to be removed. So Russia removed those. And by the way, you can never have them again. We don't want a hostile country on our border. So Ukraine's neutrality was part of the negotiation. And I think that the Budapest Accords and there was another round of accords reinforced the independence of Ukraine, that it would not join NATO, and NATO should make no attempt to bring it into its orbit. That didn't, that unfortunately was undone by the United States and NATO, where there was an overture to bring, just a walking away from an agreement that we made in the 90s, and then we orchestrated the election in 2013, wasn't it? I think
in Ukraine,
or 2014, one or the other, where Zelensky came to power largely because we helped orchestrate that whole. They call it a color revolution, where we sort of determined the outcome. A new guy, and I guess the former elected person in Ukraine was too pro-Russia. But in any case, the whole thing just unwound, and now here we are. So I think everyone has to recognize that when you make peace, you're going to have to give up things.
Okay.
Both sides need to be willing to give up, but the peace is more important than anything.
So you're
what does the Bible say about peacemakers? Blessed are the peacemakers.
Right, blessed are the peacemakers.
And we need that now more than ever.
So we could have, that they didn't think they were going to get into a civil war in Ukraine, but they did. Tensions got worse, and people needed to. The way out of that war in Ukraine is for people to be willing to work with the other side, apologize, take some concessions, basically barter and make a compromise. And we would need to do that over here, and it might be just as difficult over here for people to make concessions to the other side. Okay, yeah. Just as difficult over here for the left and the right to make concessions to the other side as it is for the Ukrainians and the Russians. Great analogy. But then that makes it sound like the reckoning is coming, because I don't see the Ukrainians and the Russians coming to any sort of agreement until a lot more people are dead and they can't do anything. And if you're saying that the situation here is like that, then it looks like we're not really going to heal these divisions. Is federalism the option then? Some people have said maybe we can't come back together as a people, but we don't need a national divorce. We just need to return to federalism, and that would reduce the tensions between left and right and keep the country together. Is that a realistic solution, and can it even happen?
Well, I think that the federal government has way overextended itself from the original vision of the founders. And we look at the results of this unaccountable bureaucracy of all these government agencies, and we can clearly see some that simply never should have been created, and they ought to be shut down. I would point to the Department of Education. Before Jimmy Carter established the Department of Education, American public schools were working much better than they are now. Public education went downhill really with the creation of the Department of Education. The federalization of the school system has not made for a better educational system. So let's get rid of it. Let's make schools accountable to their local communities. We don't need a Department of Education. And then when we begin to think, if we don't need the Department of Education, maybe we ought to undo the Department of the Environmental Protection Agency and have each state manage their environment according to what they think is right. And you could just go down the list of and we could greatly reduce the size of the federal government. We're still stuck with all this debt and the entitlement programs. I don't know that you can really reform those. The French have certainly learned the hard way that even pushing back the retirement age by 2 years created a major revolt in their country.
Yeah, the prime minister disappeared for 2 days.
That our Social Security system and Medicare are going bankrupt, and there's no solution other than some kind of reform that would probably be similar to what the French tried to do, increasing the age, and maybe I don't want to see taxes raised. I think just increasing the age is probably a step in the right direction, because borrowing, protecting the solvency through some method, we're going to end up, the system fails eventually, and it's not that far away.
Would that work? If, let's say, you had a magic wand, you could just wave your wand and boom, we've undone certain federal regulations and passed the power back to the states to a good level, whatever that is. Do you think that would actually reduce the tensions?
Well, it might not, nationally, I think it could, because then it's the domain of the state. So you could have serious division within the state. But I think, we not only need a change of heart and attitude that people have to become more open-minded, more tolerant, but we have to get back to depoliticizing science and economics and everything else. I mean, we ought to take politics out of sports. I mean, there shouldn't be politics in most things. I mean, politics should stay in that single domain of political power. It should not, we should not have everything politicized. And when we do, we find that it really causes dysfunction and malfunction. So I think people that go into public life and they bring about political change, they can always say, look, in our system, you can if you don't like the results, you vote them out of power. You vote, and you vote in a new government that's going to do things that in ways that you think would be better. So I think federalism, if it's practiced that way, is not breaking up the nation, but rather recognizing that each state is a petri dish of experimentation. That ideally, states will come up with different solutions for all of it. They all have the same problems, basically, but they'll come up with different solutions, and then hopefully people can be humble enough to say, "Gee, the state of Montana and Wyoming and point to states that have solutions to problems that are working. What maybe we need to adopt those solutions." But it's hard for people to admit that they were wrong. I mean, let's face it. When we think about learning from the COVID period, look how difficult it is for the medical establishment to own up to all the mistakes they made. Not the least of which was this rapid emergency use authorization of unproven vaccines. I mean, and no one really wants to talk about it, but there's vaccine injuries in huge numbers, unexplained loss of life in young people. And it really is got to be tied. The only variable that changed was the vaccination in terms of affecting this change. This sad story of injuries when people are taken out of the workforce can no longer work.
Right.
And that young people, athletes in particular, have dropped dead. And it's because
NFL player,
they're pumping their blood intensely, and it turns out that that's what the vaccinations seem to clog up the arteries and so forth, and people just keel over.
I apologize, but we gotta move on. Same thing with like the algorithms from a vaccine discussion. The great points. I just I gotta watch out for the algorithms. Let me ask you a follow-up question, if I may.
Yeah.
Federalism maybe could work at reducing tensions. Now, here's the real question. Do we actually have a chance of returning to federalism? Before you answer, I'd like to give you a quick story. There was a thing called Roe v. Wade, and it was overturned by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court turned the power back to the states. I'm in California, and I know liberals in New York. Nobody on the left viewed that as, oh, great, the power is coming back to the states. It's ours. It was, oh my God, they're taking away our right to have an abortion, even though that's not what it said. I argued with many people. No, couldn't convince them. No, they're coming to get all our abortions. That's what they said. So there's almost no backing on the left for greater return to federalism. Now we flip to the right. And the Republican Party and conservatives have talked about federalism. That's the right thing for us for decades. And then right after Roe v. Wade was overturned, Mike Pence, the vice president, goes on TV and says, returning power to the states is not good enough. We need a national abortion ban. And then he was not criticized by the Republican Party and also saluted for them. What chance do we have to return to federalism when one party who espoused its values turned on it at the best opportunity and the other party will have absolutely nothing to do with it?
Well, I don't know the party turnout. I don't think that Mike Pence speaks for the Republican Party.
He was not criticized by the party for doing that. Nobody came out and said
I know,
you
but I
hurt
still
federalism.
would simply say, yeah. I mean, sometimes people don't criticize because they see Mike Pence as an outlier, and they don't want to give more attention to the outlier, and they just don't want to get involved in that argument, and it'll work itself out. And I think it slowly is working itself out. And different states are doing different things, and so people can, people will choose to live perhaps in places where they're most comfortable.
So even though the vice president's were the highest ranking conservatives and he does an about face on federalism and he's not criticized by the party, it still means the party supports federalism?
Well, I don't know that the party really believes in federalism.
Oh, I mean, that's even worse.
Elements in the party do. I would put myself in that camp of believing that a federal system is superior to a tyrannical, what appears now to be a very tyrannical federal government. I mean,
right.
A centralized government.
Right.
But I think not everyone has really thought it all the way through. And the one thing you can say about the conservative side is that there's a lot of diversity on the right, and in that sense, the right is more healthy than the left. The left is very uniform. That's why you're such a breath of fresh air. Not that you're a leftist, you're not. But you acknowledge that you've been a Democrat and voted Democrat and have believed in the Democratic ideas as expressed probably by JFK and Truman and others. I mean, essentially, unfortunately, the party's just been transformed and no longer is the party that it once was. So I think I can tell you one thing, that people on the left, they are clueless about understanding for the most part, very few of them understand the Republican Party, the diversity that exists on the right. I mean, it is a pretty diverse group of people that could be called, on the right, the so-called right side. You have traditional conservatives, you have libertarians, you have a diversity of people, and they disagree with each other, and disagreement is not a bad thing.
No.
It actually is the way society should work. You learn through disagreement, you learn through debate. But there's not that much debate on the other side.
No, there isn't.
I'm not aware of it.
And to back up what you're saying, whenever I talk to conservatives, I call them conservative. Almost everybody goes, "I'm not a conservative. I'm a libertarian and anarcho-capitalist, old school Republican." Yeah, there's a million terms I've heard. And when I talk to people on the left, they don't really do that. They're just kind of like, I'm a corporate Dem or I'm super ultra lefty. Where on the right, I see like 7-10 different variations, and I'm always having trouble identifying people on the left. They don't really seem to do that. There does seem to be more of a lockstep. And I think it's more of an intolerance for diversity of opinions. If you say something that is even slightly out of line with the official narrative, you are a horrible monster. The left will turn on the left.
It's very sad. It's just we've got to end that. This demonization of people who don't toe the line, or that people that are perceived to have different ideas. It really goes to show, if you're familiar with the work of Saul Alinsky, how the Democrat Party, the left, has just been it's come to embrace the Alinsky tactics that have brought about this sort of tyranny of, the tyranny of the majority, if you will, the intolerance that exists, and the nonstop warfare against people who don't think like you think. it's sad that this has happened, and it really, our country is really the worse for it. I mean, we can do so much better than this as a nation.
Just to back up something I was pointing out, and we agree, I'm going to show everybody this. Give me 1 second. There was a famous rapper, and she was loved by the left, and everybody loved her and thought it was great until she said this one thing. I want to make sure to get this up on the screen for the viewers. Okay, we're having a little bit of difficulty. Okay, maybe there it is. All right, so let me just do this. Sorry, this is important. Okay, so Nicki Minaj was a rapper. You might not be a fan of her music. It's a little bit risque, but she was liked by the left. Very popular until she said, "Hey, my cousin is having a vaccine problem," and asked questions about the vaccine. She didn't say that it was bad or wrong. She asked questions, and in return, she was destroyed by the mainstream news for causing a dangerous form of anti-science because she asked questions, not made statements. That's proof of how the left will turn on the left. The moment you don't follow the narrative and you even ask a question, you're done. They turned on her in 24 hours. Didn't take very long. And she was persona non grata.
It's very, very sad.
I'm just saying she was super popular, and she's come back into popularity. But if you look at the moment she made this tweet asking this question and the amount of trash talk that fell on her head within a 24-hour cycle, almost destroyed her career.
Yeah.
And she asked a question. She did not say vaccines are horrible, don't get vaccines, run from Fauci. She asked questions, and she was almost destroyed.
Yeah.
So that's part of the issue there. I absolutely agree with what you're saying about how it is on the left. Unfortunately, it seems federalism may be a long shot, and what we're really looking for is this marriage counseling that involves some sort of return to values.
You're very talented at when you come up with things. I never would have thought of marriage counseling for the nation, but it's really probably the best analogy because, oftentimes people turn to marriage counseling when their marriage is on the rocks and it's about to, you're about to go to divorce court, and a good marriage counselor can bring about a healing of that marriage. And oftentimes when people get through that difficulty and they go through a healing, they look back on that and they say, gee, we never want to go there again. We were involved in dynamics that were so destructive, and it's much better now, and we want to build on this. And wouldn't it be nice if that could happen in the country, where there could be learning on both sides, and a commitment to doing it better, and it really, but there have to be, there have to be rules of the road, right? Guidelines and boundaries. And we could count on, on one hand what they would include. One is that we should have, we need to restore tolerance. We need to restore respect, and out of respect comes tolerance. We need to, we need to always strive to play fairly, to have a fair competition of ideas, and there's probably a couple more, but a recognition that another important rule of the road, it's more of a recognition, but that we want to champion the best ideas, the ideas that actually work and deliver success in people's lives. And we measure that. We have to have, we have to be able to measure these things. Not like a super scientific way, but you can certainly, you can really tell when things are getting better. you can identify things that lead to, more success and better performance, let's say, in a school system. And if we could agree on those rules of the road, what we need to uphold it. But I'm afraid right now you'd have a hard time even getting there, because I think that the so-called left side would put they're uncomfortable with diversity of ideas and the competition of ideas. They're more comfortable in a collectivist kind of a collectivism where there's conformity of ideas. It seems like that's where that's their comfort zone, is conformity, and that's the kiss of death for progress.
I think you're making a lot of good points. I do want to bring up a poll that came out in September 30th, 2021, about 2 years ago, from the University of Virginia, Sabato Crystal Ball Center, a very respected school for politics. 80% of Biden voters and 84% of Trump voters in 2021 felt all elected officials from the other party were, quote, a clear and present danger to America. 74% of Biden voters and 78% of Trump voters felt all voters from the other side were, quote, a clear and present danger to America. How do we have marriage counseling, Professor, when 4/5 of all the voters feel the other side is basically the equivalent to Al-Qaeda or a Russian nuclear missile attack?
Well, we sort of danced around this problem in our discussion. It's been a wonderful discussion, by the way.
Thank you.
And what we've danced around is that there is not a consensus any longer of values that everyone could agree on, and these values are really important, because there's no consensus of core values. It's very hard, it's very hard to enter into marriage counseling, because there's no agreement on core values. I'll say this: that the big difference between the right and the left is that the right believes in the Constitution as being maybe some people might say it's not a perfect system. They wouldn't go so far as to say it's the worst form of government except all the others. That's what they typically say about democracy, because it's messy. But we don't have a pure democracy. We have a constitutional republic. And most people on the right are very comfortable with that, because they know that rule of law is preferable to chaos. They know that a system of where a system based on merit and individual responsibility and so forth. There's a consensus that the Constitution reinforces those values or embraces those values. So most people on the right are not at war with the Constitution, but the people on the left, they want to trash the Constitution. So that is fundamentally, in a nutshell, a big problem in entering into marriage counseling. You have one side that wants to say, hey, what we have in the Constitution is worth preserving, and the other side says, no, we want to move beyond the Constitution. We want to replace the Constitution. But it's a lot like when you ask the Marxists, okay, so you critique capitalism very well. I'm sympathetic with some of your arguments. So maybe we should, maybe we don't have to have a bloody uprising of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, but we could have somehow the proletariat begins to assume control over things, and we have the means of production that are democratically controlled. Not a workable thing, but anyway, you could say it. But what's your vision for the government? You're all in favor of the revolution that transforms the capitalist order, but what's on the other side of that? That deals with the economy, but what about the political system? What would that look like? And Marx is really very deficient in holding out any model solution after everything gets destroyed.
Right.
Marxism is really a recipe for destroying the institutions of a free, really Western civilization. I'll just be very direct about it. They want to destroy, the Marxists want to destroy the church, the family, restructure the economy, and somehow the dictatorship of the proletariat will somehow just emerge as some kind of great form of government. We know it's crazy that's not going to happen. It wouldn't happen. But that's a big problem for people that want to, they want to take down this system that gives them freedom. I mean, Marxists are free in America. Marxist study groups and
Right.
People are free to pursue almost everything short of breaking the law and revolutionary activity and hurting people. But so that's a big problem. I mean, how do you? And that's this gulf you've been describing. There's this big gap and gulf between the two sides, and it exists partially because one side wants to destroy the other side. And you might, and the left feels threatened by the right. I mean, it's one reason why, they're going after Trump so strongly, because they're afraid that Trump will he's going to go after the lawbreakers that subverted the Constitution during his first term, and they're afraid of that. Maybe Trump will surprise everyone and somehow, if he comes to power again, do something quite different. I don't know how you bring reconciliation though, without there being a penalty. All these newfangled ideas about how to raise children and how to do things differently, they don't work as well as establishing, penalizing bad behavior and rewarding good behavior. That seems to be the formula that raises the best kids, and has from the beginning of time, really. And so, how do we go to a new future without there being some kind of justice served on people who violated the law and abused their position? I mean, and it goes beyond parties. It figures in the party, be it a Hillary Clinton or an Obama, but really the betrayal of our Constitution took place by people in the FBI, people in the CIA, people in many of the other government agencies, where they acted in ways that were betraying the Constitution. Should they not pay some price for that? I think they should.
That's a whole other show. I will just say that there seems to be no penalties for federal agencies violating federal laws. They just basically get away with it and move on.
I mean, there's no good outcome for this. If these trends if this isn't stopped and penalties are not adjudicated, the future is just darker. It's not going to get brighter. It's going to get darker, because the bad guys have gotten away with things. They're empowered. That's what happens when there's no penalties for breaking the law. You empower the criminals, right?
Yep.
It's not complicated.
Yep.
It's not complicated.
Yep. There's a movie called The Big Short with Christian Bale, and it's about the 2008 recession. Right. And in it, at the end, they revealed there was this federal regulatory agency that's supposed to be investigating all these banks and checking them out. And what it turned out was they just didn't do their job, because they had that incestuous hiring thing where, I used to work at the bank and now I'm part of the federal agency, and now I'm back at the bank and now I'm part of the. So it was all just trust. It's like the bank said, "Oh no, we're cool," and this regulatory agency that's supposed to ask hard questions goes, "Yeah, we just didn't. We just kind of took them at their word," and that's why the collapse happened. And Christian Bale is playing a real life character who was trying to raise awareness that a recession was coming before it happened. And in response for raising the alert, he was investigated by the FBI.
Yeah.
A fact. That's all a fact.
Yeah.
That's not a political opinion. It's well documented. The movie's called The Big Sort. It's all in there.
Yeah.
That's in 2007, over a decade ago.
Look, there's been the patterns we see in states today. Are they have their roots going back a long way. I'm not an expert on the JFK assassination, but I'm certainly aware of the arguments that point to the fact that there may have been a taking out of a president who did not conform to the what existed back then is really a global narrative back then as well, is that he was removed. But I'm not an expert on it. But I'm open-minded that there's a lot of controversy around the assassination of JFK, and I guess I'm not. I'll admit that I've not read all the literature, so I just don't know. But I think it's important to be open-minded that corruption within our government can manifest itself in ways that would surprise us, and we should be surprised. I mean, the abuse of government abuse in the period that we're passing through now is just. I mean, it's just staggering, really, that government agencies would control the media, mainstream media, social media. I mean, it's very disturbing that we don't have freedom of speech in this country. We're getting it back a little by little. I mean, it's very healthy that we've had change of hands in Twitter, and that we have alternative media growing like weeds.
True.
But it's really it's really we can't have the government involved in infringing on freedom of speech. That's a bridge too far.
Let me ask you a question. We have a question from the audience. Professor, have you heard of Whitney Webb and her 2-volume book on federal government corruption? I think it's One Nation Under Blackmail or something like that.
Well, boy, it sounds like a very interesting title and subtitle. And I have to confess, I'm not familiar with it. If it's well done and well researched and well documented, man, I'd love to read it.
Let me find that up.
Because that's the important thing is we have to differentiate between the narratives that are not substantiated with evidence and the so-called narratives that are substantiated with evidence. And this is what truth is all about. We've got to our views about the way the world works and the way the world has been corrupted have got to be rooted in facts. Got to be, not opinions, not feelings, not emotions, but hard facts.
I agree.
And it's hard to get at those facts in many cases.
Well, I'm wondering who. This is basically my last question. Is you have Trump, who's very divisive, whether he's intending to be or not. And a lot of people on the left don't like him. He's not going to pull people from the left together. Then you have Joe Biden, who said he was going to run on unifying America and being the decent America and returning America to decency and good behavior. And the Republicans going to learn their lesson, and they were all going to come back together. And that was before January 6th happened. And then that was before Joseph Biden gave his speech in front of a blood red backdrop with 2 active duty Marines, where he said basically 78 million Americans are enemies of the state. If we have a continuous line of presidents that seem to do nothing but dramatically polarize the country, who's going to be our marriage counselor in the future?
Oh, I know. I agree.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. Let me ask
Well,
you.
I think I would like to leave it on this, that if we are humble enough to recognize that we're flawed as people, each one of us, and that our society and our government reflects the flawed nature of human nature, and that we need God's help, and we pray for that, and we all really pray sincerely that we need supernatural, we need God's help to solve these problems, because they're really. I think our conclusion is that they're pretty insurmountable, but with God, I think all things are possible.
That's the impression I've been getting, and certainly with you, is that it seems there's insurmountable, at least to the point that beyond a super powerful being coming down or being involved, I'm not sure how we put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Any other last minute thoughts, Professor? Where can people find you? Before you answer, or my favorite thing I like to do with all the guests, is there something you'd like to say, a thought you'd like to leave people, where 5 days from now, they're saying, I don't remember all that interview, I remember bits and pieces, but this one professor said something and I just can't get it out of my mind. What would that be, sir?
Well, I think I'll say this. It comes out of the book that I wrote called "Rediscovering America." You don't know me and my background, but you were very generous in talking about my background.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me? Hello? Okay, give me 1 second. We're having technical difficulties. I'm going to call him right back.
Hello there.
Okay, sorry, we got disconnected. We're back. What were you going to say, Professor?
Well, I was just simply saying that I was once on the other side, so to speak, a critic of America, a critic of it wasn't as well shaped as I later came to realize, that a lot of my criticism was more emotional than it was substantive. But in any case, I left America, traveled around the world for a couple of years, and I was a Christian, and I sort of walked away from my faith also. And I spent time, about a month, on a Hindu ashram and another Buddhist sort of camp, if you will, educational camp. And what happened through all of that was I rediscovered, how great America was in comparison to what I saw in all these countries. But also, I sort of rediscovered, when I considered the great wisdom of the East, and I every morning was up at 5 a.m. listening to teachers, none of them held a candle to what you find in the Bible. None of the other religions hold a candle to Judaism and Christianity. And so I sort of rediscovered that, and then I came back to the United States. I worked, I saved my money, I went to school. I was fortunate enough to get into the University of Chicago, which had a wonderful, rigorous program based on the great books and understanding Western civilization. And so I worked hard. I was paying for my own education largely, took it very seriously, got scholarships, and ended up getting a Ph.D. But once I got to the PhD level, I realized that I was a kind of a fish swimming against a current of closed-mindedness. So anyway, finally, after being in business and so forth, I returned to the world of ideas, and that's how you discovered me. And I wrote a book because I was really concerned about. This is my third book, that America was in decline and almost irrecoverable. So I chose to write a book that would help people rediscover the virtue of our of our heritage and our system. And the title of the book is appropriately called Rediscovering America. I really designed to equip readers from every walk of life to get connected to the great accomplishments and sort of the arc of redemption that punctuate and define our history. Americans of different generations who shared a similar greatness of moral vision and believed in the beauty of freedom and equality, sacrificed their all that this nation might be protected, guided, and healed. And I really feel that we're called to do no less right now. And as challenging as this is, that's our calling, and that's what we need to do. And so this book is a wonderful read, and I rethought it thematically. I knew that people don't read books like they used to, so I made it short. It's only 200 pages. It's broken up into chapters, that each one of which is a standalone story that tells, by reading a chapter, you will get your arms around key periods of the history of our country and be able to say at the close of that chapter, and that's chapters typically they're short, 12 pages, 10 pages, 14 pages, 20-minute read, that you really understand, something about our country, a lot of things about our country that you never knew before. So this book is really a great read. And I say to people, look, if it isn't really one of the best American history books you've ever read, I'll give you your money back, because it tells the whys. Most historians, they take great pride in accounting of all the events, and of course they're voluminous and long. History books are very long. And what I've done is, yes, I talk about the events, but I tell the reader why things happened the way they did. What were the thoughts behind what caused things to happen? And what we find out is that America is there is no country like America. It's an incredible story. When you think about other nations coming into being from, the evolution of tribes, clans, ethnic and religious groups, royalty and blood lineage, and the inevitabilities of language and geography, or from the results of war, where the victors cover up the vanquished, America was founded completely differently. It was born of ideas that all people are equal in value, and that each has been given by God certain rights that cannot be taken away by any man or earthly authority. And those rights combine to create and protect a thing called freedom in life. And that's what I'll leave your listeners with. But it's a wonderful book. You can find it on Amazon. Read the reviews. It's been reviewed by Dennis Prager, Victor Davis Hanson, Eric Metaxas, a wide range of people. It's a wonderful read. It'll give you a lot of hope, and we need that right now.
That's awesome. I'll leave it there. I was also told to recommend the book, The 5,000 Year Leap by Cleon.
It's wonderful.
Oh,
it's a great book.
He's read the book. He's read the book.
I've read it many times over, and I've taught from that book. And I cite that in Rediscovering America, because it is such a great read. Skousen was just brilliant in writing that book.
That's amazing, because one of our watchers said, this professor sounds like Skousen. And then for you to say, yeah, I read the book, and I was inspired. There you go. I am 4 a.m. You were right.
I have 2 copies. I'm looking at 2 copies on my bookshelf. One for me and one to give away to someone who needs to read it.
You called it. Okay, we will leave it there. I will send you a copy of the video. Before you go, one last request. Is there anybody you know or could recommend who is a thinker and would be willing to have an honest conversation about political division?
Oh, I can think of quite a few. So let's stay in touch after the show. And
okay, I'll email you.
I'll give you some recommendations.
Thank you so much. I will email you a copy of the show in a little bit and ask for recommendations.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Great. Oh, it's been an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you saw the interview. Check us out. We'll have more coming, and we'll see you soon.